I almost didn't answer the phone that afternoon. It was a Tuesday in late October, gray and cold the way Ohio gets, before it fully commits to winter, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I've been doing that a lot since my wife passed, sitting somewhere with the intention of doing something and then just not doing it. The grief counselor said that was normal. She said a lot of things were normal. I was starting to think normal was just a word people used when they didn't know what else to say. The phone rang. I looked at it, a local number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. The man on the other end introduced himself as the attorney handling my wife's estate, not our family lawyer. My wife had retained someone separately, a man named Elliot Marsh, out of a firm in Columbus I'd never heard of. He said my wife had come to him 14 months before she died and asked him to hold a sealed envelope until 6 months after her death, at which point he was instructed to contact me directly. He said, "I think it's important that you come in, Mr. Bauer. There are some things in this envelope that I believe you'll want to know about." I remember the exact way the light fell across the table when he said that. My wife had been gone for 6 months and 3 days. I had spent those months learning how to do laundry correctly, how to cook something other than eggs, how to sleep on my side of the bed without waking up reaching for her. And now a lawyer I'd never met was telling me my wife had planned for a moment that was happening right now, while she was still alive, while I thought we were just trying to get through her illness together. Her name was Patricia. Most people called her Pat. I called her Trish, which she pretended to hate and never actually asked me to stop. We'd been married for 38 years when she was diagnosed. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. The doctors were measured in the way doctors are when they don't want to give you false hope, but also don't want to take everything away from you in one sentence. They said treatment was possible. They said some patients responded well. Trish went through 2 rounds of chemotherapy and a surgery, and then a 3rd round, and she was tired in a way I had never seen her. Tired, but she was still Trish, still sharp, still watching everything. I should have known she was watching. I drove to Columbus the next morning. Elliot Marsh was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the kind of careful manner that told me he'd had to deliver difficult news before and had learned to do it gently. He had the envelope on his desk when I sat down. It was sealed with tape and had my name written on the front in my wife's handwriting. He slid it across to me and then folded his hands and said, "I'll give you whatever time you need." I sat there for a moment just looking at her handwriting. She'd always had better handwriting than me. Neater, more deliberate. She used to leave notes in my coat pocket before business trips, little things, reminders, sometimes just her name. I'd find them weeks later and keep them longer than I should have. I opened the envelope. There were 2 things inside: a handwritten letter, 4 pages long, and a folded document that turned out to be a copy of a financial agreement I had signed almost 9 years ago. I read the letter first. Trish wrote the way she talked, directly, with a kind of patience underneath the directness. She started by telling me she loved me and that she hadn't told me any of this while she was alive because she wasn't certain, and she had decided a long time ago that she would not damage the life we had built together on suspicion alone. She said she had spent almost 2 years trying to find out if what she suspected was true, and that by the time she was sure, she was already sick, and she made the decision that I needed to focus on her and not on what she'd found. She wrote, "I know you'll be angry that I didn't tell you sooner. I know you. You would have burned everything down before you had what you needed, and then you would have lost. I couldn't let you lose." I had to stop reading for a moment. What she had found, what she had spent 2 years quietly, carefully, systematically documenting, was that my business partner of 19 years had been stealing from our company for at least the last 7. His name is Dennis Farwell. We built Farwell Bauer Industrial Coatings together out of a garage in Westerville in the mid-90s. I had the technical background, 20 years in industrial manufacturing before we started the company, the certifications, the supplier relationships. Dennis had the sales instinct and the personality. He could walk into a room of plant managers and walk out with a contract. We balanced each other out in a way that made sense, and for a long time the company did well because of it. I trusted Dennis the way you trust someone you built something with. The way you trust someone who has shown up consistently for nearly 2 decades. I trusted him enough that when he suggested we restructure the back-office operations about 8 years ago, bring in a separate accounting firm to handle payroll and billing, free us both up to focus on operations and sales, I agreed. It seemed reasonable. It seemed efficient. It was neither of those things. What Trish found, starting from a discrepancy she noticed in a quarterly tax statement that had been incorrectly forwarded to our home address, was a billing structure that had been quietly rerouted over several years. Vendor invoices were being submitted for services and materials that were either inflated by 30 to 40% or, in some cases, entirely fictitious. The payments went to a shell company registered in Delaware that traced back, through 2 layers of LLC filings she had paid a private accountant to follow, directly to Dennis. The document in the envelope was a copy of those LLC filings. She'd had them notarized. She'd done all of this while driving me to chemotherapy appointments, while making dinner, while sitting next to me on the couch watching the news. I don't have words for what that feels like. I'm not sure there are words. The letter went on. She told me she'd considered going to an attorney herself, but decided the risk of tipping Dennis off was too high if the action didn't move quickly enough. She'd considered telling me directly, but she knew me, that I would confront him immediately, and that without the right legal framing, I could end up in a worse position than I started. So instead, she had compiled everything she could find, organized it, documented it, and left it with Elliot Marsh with instructions to give me enough time to grieve before I had to deal with this. She thought of everything. That was Trish. She thought of everything. She ended the letter with this: "You gave me 38 years of a life I didn't deserve to be lucky enough to have. Go get what's yours, and then go live the rest of it." I sat in that office for a long time after I finished reading. Elliot Marsh, to his credit, didn't say anything. He just let me sit. When I finally looked up, I told him I was going to need a litigation attorney. He said he'd already taken the liberty of making some preliminary calls if I was open to hearing a recommendation. I told him I was. I want to be careful about what I say here, and what I don't say, because some of this is still in process. What I can tell you is that the documentation my wife left was thorough enough that when a forensic accountant went through it alongside our company's financial records, which we were able to subpoena through legal proceedings, the picture that emerged was clear. Over approximately 7 years, the amount that had been siphoned through the false vendor structure was not a small number. It was the kind of number that changes the shape of your retirement, the kind of number that explains why, despite 2 decades of solid revenue, the personal equity I'd expected to have felt thinner than it should have been. I had never asked the right questions because I had trusted the person who should have been trustworthy. Dennis, for his part, did not take the initial contact from my attorney. Well, there was a period of about 3 weeks where he tried to characterize the situation as a misunderstanding, as accounting errors, as a structure that had been disclosed and agreed upon. But the notarized documents my wife had assembled told a different story, and the forensic accountant's findings told a different story, and eventually the conversation shifted from denial to negotiation. I want to say something about his son here, because I know some of you will wonder. Dennis has 2 kids. His oldest son, Nate, works in the company. Has for about 4 years. He's in sales, same as his father, and he reached out to me shortly after the legal process began. Not to defend his father, but to tell me that he had not known, that he had started at the company after the billing structure was already in place, and that he'd had no visibility into those accounts, and that he was sorry. I believed him. I still do. The forensic accountant found no indication that Nate had any involvement. He was an employee who happened to share a last name with the man causing the damage, and that is not the same as being part of it. I told him that. It was an uncomfortable conversation, but it was the right one to have. Dennis's younger son is a different matter, and that part of the story I'll keep to myself for now, because it involves proceedings I'm not at liberty to discuss in detail. What I'll say is that the shell company structure was not maintained entirely by Dennis alone, and that the investigation widened in a direction I did not initially anticipate. There were days during all of this when I thought about calling it, when the weight of managing a legal process on top of running a company on top of learning to live alone felt like more than one person was supposed to carry. I'm 67 years old. I had imagined this stage of my life differently. I had imagined Trish in it, but I kept coming back to what she wrote. She'd spent 2 years doing this quietly and carefully, so that when the moment came, I'd have what I needed to win. She didn't do that so I could walk away from it. There's a diner on the east side of Westerville where Trish and I used to go on Saturday mornings. We'd been going since before the kids were old enough to order for themselves. The booths are old, the coffee is strong, and the owner knows my name. I started going back on Saturday mornings about 3 months after she passed. At first it was just painful. Then it was painful and familiar. Now it's something I look forward to in a way I didn't expect. The morning after I met with Elliot Marsh and left Columbus with the envelope and its contents and the weight of what my wife had done for me, I drove to that diner. It was early, a Wednesday, not our day, but I needed to sit somewhere that felt like her. I ordered what she always ordered: eggs over easy, wheat toast, grapefruit juice, and I sat in our booth and I looked out the window at the parking lot. I thought about 19 years of partnership, about the garage in Westerville, and the first contract we ever landed, and the night we both stayed until 2 in the morning finishing a bid that turned out to win us a client we still have today. I thought about all the dinners where Dennis sat at our table, and my wife served him food and laughed at his stories and said goodnight to him at the door, and then, I understand now, went and quietly kept working on a file she never told either of us about. She was protecting me, right up until the end, maybe past it. The legal process is ongoing. I'm not going to give you a final number or a final outcome, because we're not there yet, and because some of it is still under seal. What I can tell you is that the situation is being addressed in the way it needs to be addressed, through the appropriate legal channels, with documentation that my wife spent 2 years of her life assembling while she was also fighting for hers. Dennis and I have not spoken directly since before the proceedings began. I don't know if we will. I used to think that if this ever happened, if someone I trusted that completely ever turned out to have done something like this, I'd want to confront them. I'd want to sit across from them and ask them to explain it to me. Tell me how you justified this. Tell me what you told yourself at night. But when it came to it, I found I didn't need that. Whatever he told himself is his to live with. I have other things to focus on. I have 2 daughters who are furious on my behalf, and who call me more than they used to, which I recognize as one of the small, unexpected gifts of a hard situation. I have a company that is still standing, still operating, and now restructured in a way where I understand every line of every financial document that crosses my desk. I have a Saturday morning booth at a diner on the east side of Westerville, and I have 4 pages of my wife's handwriting in a drawer beside my bed, which I have read so many times the paper is starting to soften at the folds. She knew me well enough to plan around my worst instincts. She loved me well enough to spend the time she had left, making sure I wouldn't be left defenseless after she was gone. I was angry when I first understood the full shape of what she'd done. Angry in the complicated way you get angry at someone who is no longer there to argue back with. Angry because she should have told me. Angry because I understood exactly why she hadn't. She was right. I would have burned it down. I would have walked into his office and said things I couldn't unsay, and handed him every legal advantage in the room. She knew that. She knew me better than I knew myself, the way someone does after 38 years, the way someone does when they have been paying attention to you across a whole lifetime of ordinary Saturdays. I ask questions now that I used to assume I knew the answers to. I read what I sign. I understand the structure of my own company in a way I should have understood for years. I hired a CFO with no prior relationship to anyone connected to the business, someone I found through a process with no shortcuts and several references checked twice. These are things I should have done differently a long time ago, and I know that, and I'll carry that. But I also carry this, somewhere in the middle of everything she was going through. She decided to take care of me. She sat down, and she figured out what I would need, and she put it in an envelope, and she trusted a stranger with it, and she made sure it would find me at the right time. That's who she was. That was Trish. I still leave her half of the booth empty on Saturday mornings. I don't know if I'll ever stop doing that. I order her eggs, and I drink my coffee, and I look out at the parking lot, and I think about how lucky I was for 38 years, and how lucky I am that she was still watching out for me at the end of hers. Go get what's yours, and then go live the rest of it. I'm working on both. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this came to light. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the practical, honest kind of thinking you do when you're 67 and sitting alone in a booth that used to hold two people, and you're trying to make sense of how things went the way they went. Dennis didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who steals. That's not how it works. It starts smaller than that. A number rounded in the wrong direction, a vendor relationship that's just a little too convenient, a gradual convincing of yourself that you've earned something the accounting doesn't reflect. And then 1 year becomes 2, and 2 becomes 7, and by the time anyone's looking at it clearly, it's a structure, a system, something that required consistent, deliberate choice to maintain. That's the part I had to sit with, not just that it happened, but that it happened over and over, thousands of small decisions, every single one of which he made in the wrong direction. And Trish made decisions too. Every day, for 2 years, she made them in the other direction. She was tired. She was sick. She had every reason to say, "This is too much. I can't carry this on top of everything else." She didn't. She kept going. She kept organizing, documenting, thinking 3 steps ahead, protecting something she might not live to see resolved. That kind of discipline doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from knowing what matters and refusing to let go of it even when it costs you. I don't think I fully understood what she was made of until I read that letter. And I thought I knew her completely, what I've come to believe. And this isn't something anyone taught me, it's just what the evidence of my own life is pointing to, is that character is just the sum of what you do when no one's watching. Dennis was alone with those numbers, and Trish was alone with what she knew and she built. Both of them were making choices in private that eventually became the whole shape of who they were. That's the part that keeps me honest now. Every decision I make about how I run this company, about what I sign and what I ask questions about, and what I refuse to wave through on trust alone, those decisions are adding up to something. I want them adding up to something I can live with. I also think about what it means to actually pay attention to the people around you. Trish caught the first discrepancy because a document landed in front of her that wasn't meant for her, and instead of setting it aside, she looked at it, really looked, asked what it meant, pulled the thread. Most of us, most of the time, don't pull the thread. We're busy. We trust the people we've trusted before. We assume that if something were wrong, we'd somehow already know. I made that assumption for 7 years. It cost me significantly. I don't make it anymore. The hardest thing to reckon with isn't the money, it's the years. The dinners where Dennis sat at my table. The handshakes, the partnership that I believed was real and that, at least from where he was standing, was something he was willing to trade away for a number and an account I didn't know existed. You can't get those years back. You can't untrust someone retroactively and protect yourself from the past. All you can do is decide what you build from here. I'm building more carefully now, and I'm trying to be the kind of person who deserves the 4 pages sitting in my nightstand drawer, the kind of person Trish believed I was when she spent the last years of her life making sure I'd be okay after she was gone. That's enough of a reason to keep going. That's more than enough.